incredible mental health condition that's been recognized by the American Psychiatric Association since 1987. That was the first year it was listed in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's been in every version of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual since then. So that's 1987, 1994, 2000, 2013, and then again in 2022. It's like the unknown cousin that's connected with autism, ADHD, different language and communication disorders, specific learning disorders. And it's a mystery that many people don't know about it because it's well researched. Very few clinicians know about it. And part of the problem with DCD is that the exact professionals who notice motor difficulties, for example, occupational therapists, physiotherapists, speech-language therapists, they're not officially allowed to make the diagnosis because it's considered a mental health diagnosis. So it's evidenced motorically, but it also affects many of the cognitive processes, and that's why it's in the DSM. And then the impact of DCD almost always affects emotional regulation, social engagement, psychological well-being. So that's what DCD is.
If a family came in, or you were observing someone in school, are there things that you sort of spot and you go, I strongly suspect? Like, what are the key giveaways that you've noticed, just in general life? You know, how the family interact, or, you know, how a kid moves around in school or in the classroom?
Okay. What a great question. Again, I'm not trained as an occupational therapist or a physiotherapist, but I do have quite an extensive background in physical education and kinesiology. I'm not an athlete myself, but I just really love the human body. So I'm always looking at gait. Can't help but notice how people move. Is there some shuffling? Are people picking up their limbs properly, moving their body in an efficient manner? What does the person look like? How are they dressed? So if the backpack's hanging off the shoulder, was it too hard for it to get on? Is the jacket loose? Are they walking around in snow boots that are big and a bit sloppy because it's easier to take them
yes,
on
you
and
need
off?
them. Yes,
so just general movements and appearance. Often you will notice that individuals with DCD have low motor tone. So you won't see the definition on their arms and hands as well as you would with someone who's more athletic. Upon occasion, you notice that there's some laxness in the face. So the cheeks and the mouth might be a little bit low tone, and also in the eyes. It's hard to describe, but there's just kind of a tired lookingness to the individual, which isn't a bad thing. It's just, I think they're constantly fatigued. That's one of the factors that we hear is because of the load, the day-to-day work that they're always doing. It's huge levels of fatigue and exhaustion. And then in the classroom, I would look at how is the youngster or the older person holding their writing implement. There's many different pencil grips. Some are efficient, some are not. And are they actually steadying the paper with their other hand? Are they leaning forward on the tabletop? Again, very subtle things, but often when I'm working with a student in a testing manner, you might see them leaning on the table, propping their heads up, holding their upper body in that manner.
Because of the low tone.
Low tone, yeah. Or they're often wiggling a little bit.
Yeah, needing some sensory input into their body to make them kind of feel like
alert.
they're there.
Yeah. So it's very easy for individuals with DCD to be diagnosed with ADHD because they're often moving and fidgeting, but I think it's really a strategy that they use to keep their body alert.
Yeah.
Other things that I would see is what kind of, like how the lunch is prepared. Does it take longer in the bathroom? Are they the last student out the door when the recess bell rings, or the last one coming in? You get a sense that some of these children are just sad and very lonely, and they want to fit in, so they're kind of hanging around the edges, but they don't know how to engage with others. Sometimes people say they're very rigid in their thinking. I think that's a direct response to them trying to understand what's going on and asking questions over and over again. And if it doesn't make sense, you keep asking. For example, if you were promised a raise and then you weren't given that raise, 3 weeks from when you were promised it, you'd keep asking, like, when do I get the raise? When do I get the raise? And in the same way, I think when these children don't understand what's going on, or they're confused about, their efforts are intense, but they're not seeing successes.
Yeah.
So you'd see children who are often called a bit oppositional.
Yeah.
They are rigid. They don't fit in socially. There's kind of a gap between them. It all relates to DCD. Again, I'm seldom in the home of a family, but what I hear over and over again from the parents and the child themselves will say they need help with multiple things. With dressing, putting socks and shoes on, buttons, zippers, even getting the arms in the sleeves of the jacket, pulling on and pulling off pants. I mean, even standing, having the balance to do that can sometimes be awkward. The child's resting against the wall of the home, sitting on the floor to put their footwear on because they can't stand and balance and manage their footwear. Many children still have parents cutting food, even pancakes, helping with items in the bathroom, showering, brushing teeth, combing hair.
As in beyond an age where the parents expect themselves to be helping. Yeah. And that's what brings them to you, probably, saying, why can't they do this on their own? Or they begin to question.
Yeah, they start to question, like, what's going on? Typically they've talked to the doctor, and the doctor may or may not have sent them to an occupational therapist or a physiotherapist, and if that professional dares, they might say, it seems like there's a motor learning issue going on here. There's something called DCD, and then people tend to find me. So at home as well, I'll never forget working with a grade 7 child who had some difficulties at school, and I asked the mom, how is your child with knife and fork? How is your child managing getting dressed, footwear, eating, cutting food and things like that? And the parent said, oh, fine. And then all of a sudden she stopped and said, do you know, I still put the toothpaste on the toothbrush because I don't want it all over the sink. I still cut his food. He's in grade 7. And she said, and just recently I said, oh, his coloring is staying inside the lines. So these children may or may not like crafts, coloring. Even going outdoors to the playground can be quite a chore. They will go if parents request. They seldom want to do it on their own because there's a social piece to it. So a lot of subtle helping, trying not to be too on top of the child's learning, but you have to get out the door at a certain time too, like, come on, we're leaving. So I've heard parents say that they're often exhausted, frustrated about having to do so many little tasks for their child. Yeah. How's it been for you?
I can relate to that.
Well, one of the questions when I meet families for the first time and they come to see me, I'll often ask about bathroom habits. Like, do you still need to help your child wipe, clean up, wash hands? And they kind of look at you like, how did you know that? Well, after having done this for several decades, you hear the same stories. And if you have trouble knowing what your hands are doing in front of when you can see them, imagine how hard it is to know what your hand is doing when you can't see it. And the parents go, oh my goodness, like, can you help with that? So bowel and bladder issues are quite common in children who have DCD.
And the sensory part, because I don't actually feel that there's motor issues without sensory, because we only control our motor function in response to the sensory
Correct.
information coming.
One of the dilemmas of having DCD is that for a child who has quite a lot of difficulty getting their body to work the way they want, they may have problems with speech language, gross motor skills, fine motor skills, social development, and then professionals can take that data and make an assumption that there's a global developmental delay when actually the underlying issue is DCD. Global developmental delay is across the board. And I think that's how this started to fall underneath the autism spectrum, because before autism became its own standalone diagnosis, or autism spectrum disorder, the main category was pervasive developmental delay, which speaks exactly to what you're saying. It's a delay across all areas. But again, I would say that's not necessarily the truth with DCD, because they are capable, they understand, they just can't get their body to do it. That's a huge difference.
It is, and it's such a challenge to be able to give them that opportunity to show what they're thinking and what they're understanding.
That brings me to intellectual testing. Can we talk about that for a few seconds? Because so again, in my world of psychology, we do often assess a child based on how well they understand and respond to verbal information, visual, spatial information, how quickly they can transfer knowledge from one domain to another or apply it. That's like fluid reasoning. You're looking at a child's working memory, and you're looking at a child's, they call it processing speed, but it's actually kind of a timed hand-eye coordination task. So intelligence tests are currently designed in such a way that the typical child can manage those activities quite well. A child with DCD would struggle probably with working memory, having to respond quickly. Almost always their processing speed scores are low. They may or may not have some difficulty with visual spatial, depending on their ocular motor control. But when we as psychologists assess a child or an older individual with DCD, it's not uncommon for the scores to come out low. Because even the verbal tasks require coordination of what was the task requirement, how am I going to come up with an answer, what words exactly should I say. They know that they're in a position with someone that they don't really know, so there's often a little bit of anxiety. Am I going to score okay? It's really sad to me that people with DCD can often be judged as having a lower intelligence because of the way that the IQ tests are created.
Goes on.
Now, typically, a child with DCD or an adult with DCD is average to above average intelligence, but again, they can't perform tasks quickly, efficiently, using hand-eye coordination with their whole body. That's fundamentally what it is.
I remember doing our first sort of psych ed assessment, and my daughter could do nothing, and interestingly, we'd been on holiday prior to that, or sort of for quite a period of time, and she was very relaxed on holiday, very engaged, and she showed always showing us her capability, but it has to be in certain contexts. And then suddenly we were in an assessment room, like you say, with a stranger, being asked to put red squares with red squares. And she just not exploded, but just like wanted to do that typical, I want to move away. I'm being asked something. Okay, I might get what you're asking me, but I can't, and so we had an eruption of behaviour and avoidance and almost a tantrum, and we were there, oh please Sophie, try, and
because you're paying big dollars for the assessment.
So I had to accept the result, which was low IQ, autism, and it was like, okay, that is what she looked like on the day. But take me back to 2 weeks ago when we just taught her how to ride a bicycle at the campground, and we were searching for things and making stuff. So very situational, and those formal tests are they're there for a reason. You need to formalize things. But
that does bring me to think about a number of clients I've seen over the years that have had multiple assessments.
Mm-hmm.
If I could just share a really quick story, there was a family who doesn't live too far away from us in Alberta. I was contacted by an adult and asked about having another psych assessment, and I, of course, wanted to know a bit more, and it was an individual who had been kind of going down the road of thinking, I think I have autism, found a book that I'd written about what's going on with the autism explosion, and then read through it and said, I think this is me, I think I might have DCD instead, and it may be, maybe this is being misdiagnosed. So I met with the family, the mother came along, the mother was fascinated by this whole process, and then she was angry. She said, I've paid for 7 psychoeducational assessments throughout my child's life. And not a one ever came up with this idea about DCD. It was global delay, the child's a slow learner, the child has slow processing speed, the child has all these other issues, and many of them also turned into anxiety, depression, a lot of the mental health aspects as well.
Yeah.
And when this all came forward, the parent was quite fascinated that there was a whole different explanation she'd never heard about.
Wow. Gosh.
So the testing is only as good as what you're able to measure, and the understanding of the professional doing the test.
Mm-hmm.
If I could just, for 30 seconds, make a comment. Like, our conversation is so fascinating to talk about the whole motor piece and the sensory piece. And I'm often still confused. I know a lot of people have a diagnosis of autism, and the word autism means often by yourself, the state of aloneness, autoism. But I'm still really confused that a lot of children might be misdiagnosed, because true autism is a social communication disorder, and we're talking about like the motor issues, the sensory motor issues that can affect social and communication function, or those domains. But I don't think it's always seen as the other way around. And in fact, DCD is way more prevalent. It's always been way more prevalent than autism. And professionals aren't looking at those more common diagnoses. They're just jumping right away to something that society keeps hearing.
Yeah. Well, being in this sort of autism world, I think parents are getting a little more discerning about their child. They're not just taking the word autism and making one assumption, which
That's
a lot of people are. When you know one person with autism, you know only one person. And I think, as parents, we're beginning to say, well, what's my child's picture? And I just think when every, say, diagnoses, ADHD, autism, whatever, if you were to look at their sensory motor profile, it'll help you understand so much about how they feel in the world, how they exist. And if you look at it from the real physical aspect, you'll understand a lot of behaviour and so on. So I think, it's almost like the word has got established in certain professional domains, and actually parents are kind of ahead of that now and not wanting to be sort of pigeonholed into one word when their children are just like so different. So,
Exactly.
I think they are beginning to say, well, yeah, and what is my child's version, and I think there's something crazy like 80% of children with, or in some studies they've said 80% of people who've got a diagnosis of autism have some kind of motor impairment. So it's like, why, okay, or maybe that's DCD,
Exactly.
that's
It's probably
coexisting, or maybe even that's...
undiagnosed DCD. What I found really fascinating when I did research on why are so many people being diagnosed with autism, I discovered clearly that based on the initial research documents provided by Kanner in 1943 and Asperger in 1944, there were huge motor differences already back then. Kanner only had 11 subjects. And he talked about motor mannerisms, which were stereotypical behaviors, but often the child with classic autism were quite skilled motorically. They were quick, they could balance. Their movements may have been odd and perhaps non-functional to the observer. But that's completely different than clumsiness. And then what I discovered is that Asperger, who by the way only had 4 subjects, so the whole world of autism has been built on 11 children in the classic autism and 4 in the world of high functioning. His descriptions were profound about the clumsiness of these children, the way they held their pencils. They couldn't do sports. They were made fun of. All of the features that I know to be related to DCD. So there's a real difference between motor mannerisms and clumsiness. And I think the researchers that studied this in the late 1980s and the early 1990s just lumped it all into motor atypicalities. And that's how the whole world of autism grew into a spectrum disorder. Because I think they're putting different conditions underneath the umbrella, because these children are often alone because they don't want to be teased and bullied and ridiculed by peers when they can't do the tasks.